Have a worksheet? Let me pass it out. All right, let's pass these out real quick.
This couch has
Pass those.
some. We do need that. It's never
Yeah, and there's pens. I sent you a picture of the worksheet so you can follow along.
Which ones? Just chocolate chip macadamia.
Yeah, there's also cookies, so please help thine self. Anyone?
I've already had 3.
You want one, Michelle? Skylar? Sorry. Okie dokes. So, some of you have been here multiple times. Winston has not.
That's right.
Yeah. Welcome, Winston. So, let's just do a quick little recap before we get started on today's topic. Who can tell me something you remember from previous weeks? Anything.
Temptation is not sin.
Say it louder.
Temptation is not sin.
Good. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome, Grace.
Nuvia.
Not all of your thoughts are your own.
Perfect. Beautiful. Can you hear? Yeah. Okay, good. Do you remember anything? Were you here for any of the ones about temptation? Yeah. So let's just go over some points. We talked about the nature of temptation and what that is. And Nuvia said that not all thoughts and feelings are your own, which is true. And Stephen said that feeling temptation isn't sin, which is also true. We kind of just laid the groundwork to explain that when you're feeling temptation, it's an external war versus an internal war. Yeah. We established so, and that's the cat. Thank you for being in the video. Bye, Thor. So I know some of you haven't been here, so it's kind of hard to go over everything from the beginning, but just try to move along here. So one of the biggest things is as Christians, sometimes we feel condemned when we feel temptation before we even sin or do anything. Because we're like, oh man, how am I feeling these thoughts or thinking these thoughts? Maybe I really haven't been transformed or I haven't been saved. If I had been, I wouldn't be feeling this way. Yeah. So before you even do anything, you already feel condemned. Anyways, so we established that temptation is an external war, not a civil one. Evil desires don't come from your own heart if you're a born-again believer, because you have a new nature, you're a new creation, you've died to the flesh. We established that temptation is inevitable because we're in a spiritual warfare, right? So you're going to get pelted with bullets every now and then. But sin itself is not inevitable. We went over lots of verses and things last time, 2 weeks ago now. And then one of the weeks we talked about understanding the gospel. So we talked about the first half of the gospel. Does anybody remember what that was?
Forgiveness.
Yeah, forgiveness is the first half, which honestly is the basis for pretty much every religion. So we've got Judaism and Islam. They all believe you have to do good works and appease God to get forgiveness, right? The Jews believe that as well. So that's across all of religions. What makes Christianity different is that it doesn't just stop there. When Jesus came, he's like, okay, forgiveness is great and that's important, but there's more to it. There's not just forgiveness and nothing else happens. There's the transformation aspect, which is unique to Christianity than any other religion. The Jews don't have that. Islam doesn't have that. And the transformation aspect we talked about was you're a new creation, you've died to flesh. And we talked about how with the story of the Passover and the Egyptians, or the Israelites who lived in Egypt, they were brought out of Egypt, right? So they were taken out of the land of slavery and brought into the promised land, which is a metaphor for how we're supposed to live our lives too, right? We're not supposed to stay in bondage to sin, but we're supposed to move out, yeah? So that's kind of where we're at with the recap. And so it's all fine and good to talk about temptation, but if we don't really understand what sin is, then it's kind of what's the point of talking about temptation if we don't even know what we're trying to avoid doing. All right, so today we're going to be talking about what is sin. I just want to start with asking you guys what do you think sin is?
When you know it's bad and you do it anyways.
So they can hear you.
When you know it's bad and you do it anyways.
Okay, that's good. So a willful doing something you know is wrong. Okay.
So can you sin without knowing it?
I don't think so. Well, because there is a Bible verse saying that if you don't know it's sin, it's not an actual
we'll be talking about that. Right now, I just want you to define, like, if someone off the street were to ask you, like, what is sin, and you were supposed to explain it to, like, a little child, like,
Yeah.
what would you explain that it is? Like,
Mm.
what would you define it as?
I guess that's a good definition when you know something is bad and you do it anyway. Or the opposite, when you know you should do something and you don't do it.
That's really good too, Stephen,
Yeah.
because most people miss that.
Yeah.
Good job. That's actually in the Bible,
But I
verbatim.
feel guilty about a lot of things, so.
I'm sorry. I'll go back to my room.
Anybody else have a thought or
And I
definition?
know it's not sin, but I mean, if it's based on if we feel bad about not doing something, then I would.
But just because you feel bad about doing it, does that make it sin?
I feel bad about a lot of stuff too. That's not
She
sin.
feels bad about asking anybody anything.
I feel bad asking for any favor
Yeah.
at all.
Hey, if you don't mind, like, you don't have to, like, it's okay. But
Yeah,
could you-
like anything that's like out of asking or out of like even telling people, like that's, I feel so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are we our feelings the judge of whether something is right or wrong?
No.
Right. So we can't. That has to be
No.
thrown out.
Yeah.
It was really disconcerting. I watched, while I was like looking up for this topic and like doing some research, I went online on YouTube and typed in like, what is sin, right? And like, you know how they have those people that with little microphones and they go on the streets, like busy street corners and ask people like, hey, what do you think sin is, right? Oh my gosh. Like some of these answers, I was just like, oh Lord Jesus, like please come, because like some of these answers were like, oh my gosh, do you have any moral compass whatsoever? Like some of the answers were just like, oh, you know, I don't really know, like just whatever you feel for yourself. And I'm like, oh, so if I decide it's not a sin for me to like kill you and take your money, it's fine. Like, is that what we're saying? But some of these answers were really scary. I feel like some people have never like thought about this. They're like, oh, I don't really know, I've never thought about it before. And I was like, how have you not? Anyways, so that's why I'm asking you guys to see what you would say. If like a kid were to ask you like, what is sin? Like, what would you say?
Something that harms someone else.
Okay. Something that harms someone else or yourself.
Oh, yay.
Cool. So,
But
yeah.
worshiping idols is a sin, but it's not harming anybody.
Is it?
Well, it's harming God.
Does he count?
Yeah, he
Harms
does.
you.
But
It'll
people,
harm you.
huh?
It'll harm you.
Yes, in a way, in another it won't. Like, you know, but physically,
Is it
It's
physical
not
harm
harm.
the only harm?
no.
Yeah.
That's not.
I'm not like criticizing you. I'm like digging deeper to like, you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
But
What if you have to
it's-
punish somebody that harms them, but like sometimes you need to punish
No,
them?
you
That's
have
it.
to be like, okay,
That is discipline.
no, but if we want to go deep, like, grace is like,
I'm sorry.
is everything you say okay because it may harm somebody?
Oh gosh.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Like, everything you do may harm somebody.
Yeah, the butterfly effect.
Exactly.
Okay, let's not get too crazy.
So, because we were talking the difference between, or who was it? Was it you or somebody else?
I don't know
Hurt
yet.
and harm? The difference?
I'm not sure.
Must have been Anna. You guys are the only ones that talk like that. So, the difference between hurt and harm.
Okay, I don't know.
So, your words can hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah,
Okay, fine, but that's not harming them.
it
You
may be.
can.
No, the
No, it can
definition
be.
is different.
No, because you couldn't, just like the worship thing, it harms your soul and it hurts God. But
That's what we're saying that is.
Well, let's
No,
not
I mean,
let's not
but
get off
when-
topic.
no, when you're telling people bad words, if they're sensitive or if, you know, they look up to you,
But then
you
that's a
can
sin.
really-
You're literally agreeing with me. That's a sin then. Because the Bible
Oh,
says
yeah.
cruel words. is a
Okay,
sin.
yeah, no, I
Okay.
thought you said the opposite. Sorry.
No. Because
Okay.
the things that harm
Yeah,
are a sin.
yeah.
I also think
Alright.
intent has to do with it too, because like
What does?
intent, like
Yeah.
what if you like,
Steven, you're bringing up all the points. I
what if
appreciate
you like
this.
trying to hurt somebody but you don't? You still sin, right? Like what if you try to chip somebody but
I used that analogy a couple weeks ago, like where your intent matters. Like if I
Yeah.
accidentally trip someone and they fall over and hurt themselves,
yeah.
they're probably not gonna be mad. But if like I purposely try to trip someone, even if they don't fall, they're gonna be like, yo, what the heck? Like, what was
Yeah.
that for? You know?
True. Right.
So these are all, a lot of what Stephen points I'm gonna be bringing up here in a second.
You're welcome.
So Stephen, do you wanna just teach the?
Yeah, well, you did give me the sneak peek.
I did give you the sneak peek, you're right. Okay, so things that if you take a look at the worksheet, you'll see that my drawing isn't the best, so let's just not look at that.
I like the symmetry.
So the top you have a heart and the bottom is supposed to be a brain. It looks like a cloud.
Oh, that's what it's supposed to be. I didn't know it was a brain.
Okay,
I thought it was a thought cloud.
right. Well, that
Which
works.
comes
A
from the
thought
brain.
cloud comes from the brain.
So I
Beautiful. We're right here. Okay. So the top, I found that from the Bible, basically sin boils down to either something coming from the heart or coming from the mind. So that's why I have the heart and the brain here. And so on the left side, I have things that are sins that we're going to talk about in a second. And then on the left is sins. I can't do left and rights apparently. And on the right side is things that aren't sins that a lot of people kind of get confused about, like, oh, is it a sin or is it not? So let's look at the first one on the heart side for sin, where it says sin is a heart posture of, and then it has blank and blank. Does anyone want to look up the first verse?
Yes.
Nuvia. Luke 6:46.
46.
Lucas 6:45.
Why
Sí,
do,
46.
Sounded good though.
why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say?
I love that verse because like Jesus was literally like a major burn just then. What do you guys think about that? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say?
Well, if someone's your Lord, you listen to them. So
Okay.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So we see here that basically Jesus is saying like, hey, y'all are saying that you're Christians and like that you are loyal to me, but you don't do anything that I say or live like according to my ways, right? So let's just look at the next one here in a second. Hebrews 3:12-14.
Got it.
Okay, Nubia. Hebrews. How are you already there?
I'm prepared.
Apparently, I'm not prepared, so there's that.
Where are we?
Hebrews 3:12-14.
See to it, brothers, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We have come to share in Christ if we hold firmly till the end the confidence we had at first.
Is that it?
12 to 14.
Okay. So here he's saying, who's talking? I don't know who's talking in this actually.
Probably Paul.
Who wrote Hebrews? Anybody know?
Paul?
Probably Paul, we're not sure, but.
We don't know. Okay, we'll just say
people's
Paul.
guess based on like.
Okay.
language.
Okay, here it says, none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. So we see here again that sin comes from deceit, which from lies. Satan is the father of lies. He wants you to believe that everything you're feeling is from you. He twists the truth of God, and that's how he tricks people. Let's see. I was wanting to actually read farther along. I'm just trying to
Okay.
remember.
I can read
Keep
13.
going to 19. I think that was supposed to be 19 rather than 14. I think the 4 turned into a 9. Yeah.
As has been said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion.
Yep.
Who were they who heard and rebelled? Were they not all those Moses led out of people? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the desert? And to whom did God swear that they would never enter his rest, if not to those who disobeyed? So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief.
So there's a lot in this. What I'm wanting to point out here is that they're talking again about the Passover, which we talked about 3 weeks ago now. So it's that Moses led out of Egypt. So again, we're talking symbolically, Egypt is representative of bondage to sin and slavery. That's a theme in scripture. Egypt is representative of that. Yeah, and so he's saying, the Lord is saying we brought you out of Egypt, we brought you to the promised land. but yet you hardened your hearts against me. And we know that the Israelites like constantly like turned away from God, right, in rebellion. And then it says they would never enter his rest. And like that rest is like super important. Like what were they resting from,
Slavery,
right? But like what would that translate into today?
sin.
Yeah. So like always striving and feeling like you have to resist and fight a battle that's already been won. Like they did not have to even lift a finger really to like win the battle to be brought out of Egypt. Like God did everything. He sent the plagues, he parted the Red Sea, like he showed them the way. All they had to do was follow. And the same thing for us, like we can't enter into the rest of knowing like we have been delivered until we can like stop striving to win a war that's already been won. Like when we're constantly trying to like, sanctify ourselves or feel like we have to like, get better or perfect ourselves, we're denying the finished work of the cross where God has already like put our fleshly nature to death and become a new creation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's a lot in that. So the two blanks here, and we'll read the last one here in a second. The heart, sin coming from the heart is having a heart posture of rebellion and selfishness. Rebellion we've seen, like, it's what Michelle was saying, like purposely doing something you know is wrong. Like it's bad and you're still choosing to do it anyway out of rebellion. That comes from the heart, right? Like that sin comes from the heart. The next one, or the second blank, was selfishness, and we know that selfishness is the opposite of love, and that's what, God is love. Let's look at the last verse here, Matthew 6:1-8.
Got it.
Okay, is this like contest? So you can
let him have it.
you let him have it.
Throw it a little.
Okay, Matthew 6:1-8. Let me turn to it.
Be careful.
I'll wait until.
Hold on,
everybody's
I want to turn to it too.
Yes, I'm waiting.
Okay, can you guys hear?
Say amen
Like I don't know
if
if we're
you
being
got
loud enough.
Amen.
Huh?
it.
Hallelujah. Praise the Lord.
Okay.
What?
All right, read it loud, Stephen. Matthew 6:1-8.
Watch out! Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I tell you the truth, that is all the reward they will ever get. But when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. Then your Father who sees everything will reward you. When you pray, don't babble on and on as the Gentiles do. They think their prayers are answered merely by repeating their words again and again. Don't be like them, for your Father knows exactly what you need even before you ask Him.
Okay, awesome. So what do we see and hear from this passage here that would indicate like a definition of sin?
Your motivation.
Okay, yeah, so you talked about intent. So we see people doing a good deed, right? Like praying, giving to the poor and the needy. Those are all good things, right? Those are generally considered like good things to do. But we see that he's condemning it because of the intent, right? And so it's out of a selfishness because they were just wanting attention and to look good in front of other people. It's not out of rebellion because they're still doing what God said to do, like do these things, like give to the poor.
Just being show off.
Yeah, which comes from selfishness and wanting to like look good and like it's about pride, so that's why all of this comes from those two things, rebellion and selfishness, because those really are like the main two like core like heart motivations for doing any sin like that you can think of, really. Like if I know something is wrong, I want to do it anyways, that's rebellion. And if like I'm doing the right thing, because I'm not rebelling, I'm wanting to do the right thing, but I'm doing it with like ulterior motives of like, oh, I want to look good, or like I want people to think I'm really a good person, like the Pharisees. That's out of selfishness. You're not really doing it out of concern for the other person. You just want to be seen doing the good things. Does that make sense? So really, those are kind of like, there may be more, but I feel like those are like the two core things from the heart where sin comes from. Did everyone kind of follow?
Yes.
Do we agree?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go down to,
So the blanks, rebellion, and selfishness.
yeah, rebellion and selfishness are the blanks. Heart posture of rebellion and selfishness. Right there.
On the left side or on the right?
On the left, where it says sin. So the left side is like the sin column,
Yeah.
and the right
It's
side
like
is
if
the
you're
not sin.
left-handed.
Well, if you're right-handed, it's the other way.
Okay, so do we want to do what's not sin for the heart, or do we want to go to what sin is for the brain?
I kind of want to do the heart.
You want to stick with the heart right now?
Yeah, if we
If we can, okay. All right, let's go to the other side. So, what is not sin coming from the heart, right? And this is where I think Stephen made a couple points. I'll just tell you, because I don't have
Okay.
a verse for it. The first blank is on the right side is mistakes and accidents. So this is kind of like that analogy I just used a couple minutes ago with like I accidentally trip somebody and it causes them to get hurt and fall down. It caused damage to that person, yeah? Like they got hurt. But it wasn't a sin in the sense that I wasn't like out of the motive of my heart, I wasn't trying to do that to them, right? That's why and even in the court system, we have like manslaughter versus murder 1.
Yeah.
You know, like there was an intent there, you know? They recognize that intent matters. You know, like even the same result, someone died, right? But like, did you plan to do it or was it completely an accident? You know, so even like human courtly justice recognizes the difference with that. So that's an important thing to know because people, I feel like a lot of Christians, especially if they're like really works focused, they're so worried about like messing up or making a mistake and then like being like, oh, am I sinning? Like, oh, I don't want to choose the wrong thing. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like a mistake or an accident is not a sin. Does anybody have any disagreements to that? No? Okay, we'll go on to the next one. The next one is thoughts and feelings are not a sin. Now this one, I know is usually people don't agree with right away, which is why we started out with this topic weeks ago with like the nature of temptation and establishing the fact that not all thoughts and feelings come from us. You know, God can speak to us in our thoughts and feelings. We can have our own thoughts and feelings. Like the devil also gives us thoughts and feelings. You know, especially if you're a born-again believer and your old nature has died, you don't want to sin, you don't want to pursue evil because your heart is for God, right? So all those evil thoughts and feelings that you feel, those aren't coming from you. Those are coming from externally from the devil, right? Because when you do sin, like you feel bad about it, right? You feel guilty, you feel shamed, you regret it. That proves that like that's not from who you really are. You know what I'm saying? If you didn't feel bad, then that'd be different. Like if you're like, oh yeah, I did that, so
Yeah.
like that's different, right? So thoughts and feelings, huh? Well, this is good news. You shouldn't have to feel bad about everything. And then this is preaching to myself too because I feel bad about a lot of stuff. I mean, I'll just actually real quick just to reinforce this because I feel like this is like the one thing, like the biggest thing that like Satan uses to deceive people because like we feel like our thoughts and feelings are all our own because we're feeling them, like we are experiencing them happen, right? And it's really easy to be like, well, I'm feeling this, so it must be me. And that's where like falling into sin becomes really easy because you feel like, oh, well, it's coming from me, and, you know, and then you start having that shame game. We talked about the shame cycle 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I do remember like each time you sin, you get further and further like away from feeling close to God. Just to reinforce, let's just go real quick. There's tons of verses to back up this, that your thoughts and feelings aren't sin. But my favorite one is Ephesians 6:10-14. Someone wants to,
Are you sure?
am I sure about,
The armor.
huh?
Isn't that the armor?
Yes, it is. Ephesians,
Got it.
why can't I find it in my own Bible?
5 verses.
1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, and Ephesians. Here we go. Sorry.
Ephesians what now?
Ephesians 6:10-14.
Wait, Ephesians 6:10 through 15.
I'm just actually. Can I just read it?
Yeah.
My cat literally keeps walking in a circle around the coffee table. And his tail just
The
keeps
7
going.
times the building's gonna fall down.
Oh my gosh, maybe that's what. He's been reading his Bible. Oh, Michelle, feel free to jump in. I sometimes forget you're over there. Because you're in a computer screen. Okay, Ephesians 6:10-14. I'm just going to read it. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. I just want to pause right there because there's just so much already. So, why do you put on armor? Like, when you go into what?
Battle.
Battle, right? So we already established we're in spiritual warfare. We're fighting an enemy, which is not ourselves. It's the devil. And it says so you can take your stand against the devil's schemes, right? Not so you can take a stand against your own sinful nature, because that's been put to death. Okay, moving on. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. I think that's pretty straightforward. I don't need to explain that. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. And I love that, because like the belt of truth is the first thing that they mention, because knowing the truth about it is like the most important thing when you're fighting. It's impossible to win in a fight where you're engaging the wrong enemy. Does that make sense? So that's just like my favorite verse for that. But there's tons more, which if you have your worksheets from before, you can reference that. All right, let's go to the next blank. So first one was mistakes and accidents. Next one was thoughts and feelings. And the last one,
Actions.
how'd you know?
I'm just kidding.
Nubia! Yeah, it's actions. So I struggled with like how to phrase this. I was like, arbitrary actions or actions in isolation, but I settled on like actions in and of themselves. So let me just ask you guys a quick question. Is killing a sin?
No. Murder
Yes.
is. Murder is.
Okay, Steven.
Oh, self-defense, no.
Right, exactly. So same result, you're killing someone. Murder, premeditated for no reason, that's obviously bad. Self-defense.
For a reason.
Someone-
Still bad.
Someone breaks into my house, like I'm allowed to defend myself, right? That's not, no one says that's a bad thing. So the same thing, killing someone, that action in and of itself, not a sin. It's the motive and intent behind it, right? I feel like people get lost in that sometimes. What about this? What about lying? Is lying a sin?
Yes.
Based off of? People often quote the Ten Commandments and say, oh, it's in the Ten Commandments. But actually, the Ten Commandments doesn't actually say don't lie. It says don't bear false witness against your neighbor, which actually is two very different things. The first one, lying, that can encompass like anything that's not true. So it could be like, oh, well, this coffee table's purple. That's a lie. Is that a sin? No, because that's not hurting any, there's no intent to hurt anyone, right? Where it says, do not bear false witness against thy neighbor, that's literally like you're trying to get someone in trouble and like ruin their lives based off something that's not even true. So like that, back in like the olden times in Israel, they had a justice system where someone couldn't be put in jail or sentenced or whatever unless there was like the witness of like 3 people. And so if people are lying, saying, oh yeah, I saw him steal that thing, and they didn't, they're gonna get punished unjustly, right? So the purpose of like, do not bear false witness against thy neighbor is so that you're not giving someone undue punishment and manipulating the truth in order to cause someone harm. Does that make sense? So lying, people often say, oh, it's in 10 Commandments, don't lie. I'm like, lying isn't always bad. Like if your wife says, hey honey, how do I look in this dress? And you don't think she looks very good, you can say like, you look beautiful.
You tell her he looks bad.
I just said that to be funny. I said that to be funny.
You guys need to speak up over there.
Here's another example. We see in the story of Rahab. You guys remember the story of Rahab?
The prostitute.
The prostitute. What did she do?
She prostituted.
Right, she prostituted, but like what else?
Lied to the spies.
Dead.
She hid 2 people in her house.
And lied to the
Okay, so she hid.
But she
After she
prevented
was
her
done
death.
prostituting, she hid 2
Spies, right?
yeah, the spies from Israel
Yeah.
in her house, and then the people from Jericho or whatever were like, hey, do y'all have them here? And she's like, no, they went over there, which was a lie, right?
Did she say that?
Yeah.
Yes, she
Yeah.
was like, I think they went out at sunset. Chase them down.
Yeah, she totally hid them. She totally hid them and then like sent them off in the wrong direction, right? And like the Lord spared her life and like praised her for doing that and for her faithfulness. And it's like,
so they praised her for her lyingness.
because the lying isn't like that
Yeah, she
action in
protected.
itself wasn't the sin. It was she lied in order to protect someone else from someone else's harm. They were going to take those 2 men and kill them or whatever, right? And another example, I think it's in Exodus, the story of the midwives. I think Pharaoh had told the midwives to go out and kill the babies because the Israelites were having too many children and to like weed out the population. And the midwives didn't want to do that because they're like, that's messed up. You know, I'm not going to go kill some babies. So they lied to Pharaoh saying, oh, well, you know, these Israelite women, they're just really strong and they're just stronger than Egyptian women and they just have the babies before we even get there. So we weren't able to do it, you know, and like they were blessed and protected by God. And so the point I'm making here is like, we can't just look at an action in isolation or like an action in and of itself and say that's a sin, because without an attachment to like an intent or like coming out of rebellion or selfishness, like the action in and of itself is not sinful and actually could be praised, like the lying, for example, or you know, self-defense is not. No one's gonna fault you for that. Does that make sense? Nuvia, you look confused.
I'm not sold on that, but we can keep going
What
Well-
about,
to the next
I
one.
feel like some things, like what about adultery? That's always sin, right?
Well, there's some things there's no way to divorce it from an intent. You know what I mean? Like some things are just inherently like the reason why it's wrong is because there's no way to do it right. Like there's no way to cheat on your spouse without there being an intent of selfishness. You see what I'm saying? Like there's no way to do that. But if you can divorce an intent from an action, that means that action isn't inherently wrong, if that makes sense. Like if you were to say, is it wrong for someone to sleep with someone, like let's say I'm married to Bob, right? If you asked me like, hey, is it wrong for Grace to go sleep with Gary? You're like, yes, if I'm still married to him and he's alive. If he were to die,
What if Bob's cool with it?
huh?
No.
What'd you say?
He said, what if Bob's cool with it?
No, that doesn't matter. But if he were to die,
There's no harm there.
if he were to die and I remarried Gary, now it's okay. Like, do you see, like, even Romans 7 talks about that. Like, a woman is only bound to her husband while her husband is alive. When he dies, she is now free to go marry someone else.
So I think when you go to heaven and Bob and Mary and somebody else are there, like she's gonna have two husbands.
You know, the Pharisees asked Jesus this direct question.
There's no marriage in heaven.
Yeah,
Oh,
That
true.
doesn't-
Yeah.
That doesn't really answer the
Jesus
question.
and, you know, the Pharisees asked Jesus the same question, like, what happens, like, with someone who's had multiple husbands and wives, so, like, when they get to heaven, then what? It's like, there's no marriage in heaven.
Yeah,
So,
but then
kinda-
That doesn't answer the
so
question.
sad.
What's the question?
Though. That like.
So what do you
still?
do?
What do you do?
Yeah, because
What do you mean, what do
you
you do?
as yourself know you had these two people. Now these two people will be alive at the same time.
Yeah.
And
There's
you're
no
not
marriage in
marriage. There's no marriage, but these people are still there.
So,
So what? God
So
built
you're
us
just-
out
I
sex
just
on earth and
can't
not in heaven.
fathom it. 'Cause it
we're not gonna,
isn't like
we don't need to get into this, but remember, we're not gonna be in heaven forever.
Well, yeah.
Like, we're there for a little bit, then we come
but
to the
this,
new earth.
this Bob and this other person.
But, like, do you guys really
well,
think, like,
That's just
our minds
drama.
aren't gonna be renewed? Like,
Yeah.
It's
drama,
not gonna be there.
Michelle, remember, drama is based in selfishness, right? Like, you want something that, like, but we're not gonna have that when
You're
we're,
like,
like,
thank you for taking care of my.
yeah, like, in the new earth, like, in heaven, we're not gonna have that same root of, you know what I mean? Like, we're gonna be completely changed. Like, we're not gonna have the petty, like, reality TV show drama, you know, going on. We're gonna have pure, like, love for each other the way that Jesus had love for us. And it's like, we're not gonna be like, oh, well, I had you first. You know what I mean? Like, there's not gonna
Oh,
be
I'm
that.
not talking about that.
Then what are you talking
Not
about?
like about I had you first. No. I'm talking about like okay, this is like I don't know, but it's
Like, who are they gonna marry?
no, they're not gonna because there's no marriage.
Are you wondering if
But
it's
it's-
gonna be
Sure, but
awkward?
Yeah, like the awkwardness.
I'm
not
pretty
about,
sure we'd get over it. Like,
I don't have
Oh, yeah,
awkwardness
just get over
there.
it.
Like everything's gonna be okay. And
Like-
whatever questions we have, like Jesus will answer and be like, oh, I get it now.
like the things that are really bothersome to us now are gonna look like nothing in comparison when we get there. Like, you know, and Jesus even says that. Like, Paul says, I count, like, what is it? I look at the struggles before me, and it's not, what's that verse? Michelle, you know what I'm talking about. Like, I count nothing compared to the joy in front of me.
Yes.
What is it?
Well, we're in front of Jesus. We're gonna just be like, I mean, we're gonna be so obsessed with him and the angels and the, you know, and we'll be in new bodies too. We won't look like this.
We don't look like this. we're still thinking from an unrenewed mindset when we think about like the things that are gonna bother us now that are gonna bother us then. Like we're still we're filtering like what we're looking at through an unrenewed mindset and denying the power like of God's love really being able to transform what's important to us in our hearts. And so when we get there, we're gonna find that a lot of things that we cared about like are gonna just fade away. You know, and like when you have pure love for another person, like you're able to love this person like completely without there being like awkwardness or like that's how people like that's how Jesus was able to love people that were crucifying him. Like was it awkward? Like would he feel kind of like petty and resentment? Like no, he looked at that person.
I get that, but for me, like ex-people that are not very close to me or that are even close but not are like I haven't invested feelings to those people, like I don't really like I can forgive them. I can like whatever, you know, you can say or practically do like whatever and I can
Peter
still,
was one of Jesus' best friends and he denied him 3 times. And Jesus still didn't change his mind about him.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
What she's saying is that, like, when it comes to people who mean basically nothing to her, it's easy to say, oh yeah, forget it.
Not just nothing, not
I know
no.
what you mean.
But
That sounded
it's-
more harsh than that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I was like,
Well, no,
I
it's-
have
yeah.
people in my life that have done, and then have asked for forgiveness, and I've forgiven them. Like, and
We all do.
I don't have hard feelings
Mhm.
for them. Like, it's like, okay, you know, whatever, that's in the past, you know. But then there's people like my parents that if they did something like that, or if they would tell me some stuff like that would hurt me 100 times worse than, you know, anybody outside.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying it won't,
Mhm.
but harboring unforgiveness or being not able to forgive someone is rooted in self because
Yeah.
you're like, that person hurt me. You know, it's about what
Yeah.
they did to me. And we read in 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, is that love holds no record of wrongs. Like, God, we do things against God all the time, but God doesn't look at us and feel like, you know, like, oh man, well, they did this to me. Like, I don't know if I can, and like, there's no
that's-
separation
that's what
between me and us and God. So like, you know, like, we're like, that level of mindset we have now is not going to be the mindset we have in heaven. When we're, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I know that. Oh, I'm not.
It's fine. Yeah, so I mean, we can go down a wormhole on this, but like, we can just move on to the next one. So that pretty much wraps it up for the heart. You know, analyzing what's really in your heart with something is the most important. Like, thoughts, your motives are really important. Not looking at actions just in and of themselves lends itself more towards legalism. People being like, oh, is this right or is this wrong? Is this sinful or is this not? And like worrying constantly that like you're gonna mess up and sin somehow by picking the wrong thing accidentally is more towards a legalistic mindset rather than. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go to the brain cloud, whatever it is. Okay, so the first blank, mindset of. So let's look at, and I think you guys will be probably able to fill in the blank yourself, maybe. Let's look at 1 Peter 1, 13 to 14.
Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Christ is revealed. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance.
Let me turn to it. Hold on.
You're so-
Yeah, sorry. No, that's not.
1 Peter
Oh, Lord. 1, 13, 14.
1:13.
Yeah, that's.
That's what she just read.
Wait, read it again.
Therefore, prepare your minds for
Okay.
action. Be
Yeah.
self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Christ is revealed. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance.
Okay, it just threw me off because your version in the beginning was just different than mine. I was like reading it and I was like, that's not what mine says. Yes, mine says, therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober,
Yeah.
set your hope in the grace, blah, blah, blah. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. What do we notice as a common theme in these two verses?
Mind.
The mind, yeah. So the first part saying, with minds that are alert and fully sober, and then it says at the bottom, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. So we hear, well, obviously we're in the mind section because we're talking about the brain. So let's just put a tab in that and go to Hosea 4:6.
Got it.
Go ahead, Stephen. Read it loud.
My people are being destroyed because they don't know me. Since you priests refuse to know me, I refuse to recognize you as my priest. Since you have forgotten the laws of your God, I will forget to bless your children.
Does anybody have another version?
Oh, now you want
I got New King James.
My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge.
Good. That was what I was hoping for. And you kept going. I was like, I don't remember that part. Yeah,
I'm
so,
in the NLT.
huh?
I'm using the NLT.
Oh. Can you read it one more time, Winston?
My people, I don't have the verse in front of me anymore, but I think it said, my people are destroyed from lack of knowledge.
Right. So what can we relate that one to the First Peter verse?
ignorance.
Okay. So far we see, so lacking of knowledge is destroying them. In First Peter, we see that they don't want you to conform to evil desires they had when they lived in ignorance. Let's look at Colossians 1:21.
Got it. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior.
Okay. So what do we notice here that ties in?
You're alienated from God?
Because, or where?
The mind and
Thank you, Winston.
In the mind.
It says, once you were alienated from God and enemies in your minds, right? So we find out, like, we see that, like, what you believe is really important. Like, what your beliefs are really going to affect how you live. If you believe, like, just as something as simple as, if I believe I'm a failure, like, I'm probably going to fail a lot more and not try because I just believe I'm going to fail. Whereas if I believe that I can do it and I really have confidence in myself, I'm going to eventually succeed. I'm going to keep trying until I get it. Right, so like your beliefs really, like, I mean, it sounds lame, like your attitude determines your altitude, but it's like really true. You know, like your beliefs really do affect how you live. And there's one more.
And you can see it in like placebo things too. Like,
Yeah, placebo effect's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but really,
That's what
like
I
you
do.
think, oh, this pill is helping me,
That's right.
and it does. Like, and it's not even supposed to do anything.
Yeah.
So that's a good example. All right, the last one's Romans 12:2.
Got it.
All right, read it loud and proud.
Okay. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect.
Let's get someone to read it in a different version too.
She wants my version,
No,
guys.
I like
Do
your
not
version.
conform
I
to
just
the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
You might.
Then you will be able to test and approve God's will. Is His good? Wait, what?
His good and perfect will.
It said His good, pleasing, perfect will. Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I
That's
really.
what God's will is His good, perfect, pleasing.
What version do you?
The new international version.
Yeah, I have NIV as well. I like hearing the other versions too, but it's just hard for my brain. Like when I'm looking for specific words. What? Yeah, I don't know what that is. Like that version's.
Bro,
That's the
I told
NIV
you
of
it was
lies.
messed up, right?
I think
What version?
she has a Spanish
It's
English
NIV,
Bible.
but it's not NIV.
Yeah, it's
I
like
don't recognize it.
Spanish English. They messed up somewhere.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So do you consider it to be a sin then if someone is trying to change their behaviors and they're doing things because they want to be better, but it's not really in their character yet? So they're
Can you
doing
explain
it
that a little bit?
technically, like it feels like it's more doing it for the works side of it because it's not part of their character to naturally just do these things that are better.
Okay, what's the motivation? Like, are they doing these good things because they're wanting to be more like Jesus, or they're doing these good things because they feel like, oh, well, this is what I have to do, and it'll make me look good?
Well, it might start out like that, but the motivation is essentially because they want to get closer to Jesus.
Well, if the motivation is to get closer to Jesus, that's how your heart is postured, right? And so as long as you're like when you're an infant learning to walk, you're gonna make stumbles, right? But you still like get up and keep walking. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, like the difference between, what was it, Cheap Grace Chad and Transform Tyler, like how their lives look after they sin. Like when someone sins, and they stay there, that's different than like if you sin and get right back up and keep going towards Jesus. Like you're expected to stumble like as you're walking towards the Father. Like infants have to learn to walk. You know what I mean? And so that's completely different than like someone who's just like, you know what, I really just don't care. I'm just gonna keep sleeping with my boyfriend because it's not really that big of a deal and God loves me. You know, he'll forgive me. That's completely different. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah, Romans 12:2. I really like this one because it's saying like you will be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so we see like transformation happens when we renew our minds, right? Like, and in our brains, when we don't believe transformation is possible, then we keep seeing fruits of not transformation.
Unbelief.
Right. So like if you don't believe transformation is possible, then you're never going to manifest that. Like if you don't really believe that you're a new creation and that sin is inevitable and that you can't like we'll never get over sin until we go to heaven someday, like that's what you're going to experience in your life. You know, I've experienced that in my life personally. Like there was things I used to struggle with like on the regular, like daily, you know, but then like when I really like soaked in this truth of like that I really am a new creation and that old me has been like put to death and crucified with Christ, like my brain changed, the way I thought changed, and that changed the way I lived. Like things that used to like ensnare me and like get me down every single time, like no longer were difficult anymore. And so like what you believe is like super important. And that's why like I love this verse saying like you will be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So I think that's, yeah, so the first blank for this one is the mindset of incorrect thinking. Or we could say you know, twisted mindset, or, you know, and it's a little bit different than what the next blank is going to be. You mentioned it, but we'll just go into the next blank. I think you'll pick it up pretty quick. Matthew 16, 1 through 4. Matthew.
So what goes in the blanks?
I'm sorry?
What goes in the blanks?
The incorrect thinking.
Mindset of incorrect thinking.
What?
Is that what goes in the blanks?
Yes.
Yeah, incorrect thinking is the first blank.
None of the friends I got from
Mindset of incorrect thinking.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, Nuvia, 16, 1 through 4.
The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, "When evening comes, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah." Jesus then left them and went away.
Okay, so what do we see happening here?
No, the Christian Pharisees asked for a sign, but Jesus.
So what are we seeing like in them because they're asking for a sign? What has Jesus been doing this whole time?
Exactly.
Like what has he been doing?
That's right.
Performing miracles.
It's a question, Nubia.
Performing miracles,
I'm
which
saying
are
I agree
basically
with you.
signs.
Yeah, he's been doing miracles and signs this whole time.
They're blind.
Right.
Ooh, good
Yeah, but that's not the
They're
blank.
choosing to be blind.
That's coming up.
They cannot interpret.
Bonnie, what you just said is coming. So like they're asking for a sign, but they've already seen them, right? So it's like, does someone need a hard surface to write on?
No,
You can borrow this if anyone needs a hard surface.
you can just use his heart.
Do you need a? Can someone just take it? I feel useful.
Well, it's not getting
Okay.
better now.
Okay. So why are they asking for another sign when they've already seen them? Huh?
Because they don't believe.
Thank you. Yes. Points for Michelle. The other Michelle.
I said unbelief.
Right. So it's their unbelief.
Time ago.
We're staying in Matthew.
Do you want the points? Give her the points.
Let's flip to Matthew 21. Matthew 21, just 5 chapters later. Can't math. Matthew 21, 31, and 32.
I got it.
Okay, Bonnie. No, this is not right. Dang it.
I feel like it is.
Hold on.
During the will of his father, like this is the parable of like
Tax
the sons and the
collector.
vineyard.
Hold on a second. Oh, yeah, sorry, keep reading. 31 to 32. It just starts out not where I want it to.
Do you want me to start?
Start at
earlier?
truly. Truly, I tell you. It's like halfway through 31.
Oh, okay. Assuredly I say to you that tax collectors and harlots enter the kingdom of God before you.
Yes, sir.
Ouch. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But tax collectors and harlots believed him, and when you saw it, you did not afterward relent and believe him.
Right, so this is, well, we already have the blank already, but pointing to unbelief. Right, so they basically, like, God is saying, like, look, I've given you every reason and every evidence, and saying, even after you saw everything, you did not repent. And what do you have to repent from? Sin, right? And so here it's showing unbelief is sin, and if we, I kind of went on too quickly, but in the Matthew 16 one where it talks about asking for a sign, it says a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign. So again, it's pointing to like unbelief, and it's in and of itself is wicked and requires repentance, because like you constantly see over and over again something, you're like, oh no, I don't want to believe that. Your face.
It's rough because
It's rough, but it's
when have we believed everything? We haven't.
Right.
So,
But you see, like belief, belief comes from where? Like, I don't know how to guide you to this, but like it's hard to believe someone if you don't what?
Trust.
Thank you. Yes, Stephen, I love you right now. If you don't trust someone, it's hard to believe someone, right? Like if I didn't know Stephen and he just came out and said something super random, I'd be like, I don't know. But since I have a relationship with him, like we've established.
I don't know.
Since we have a relationship and like I trust him, I'm more likely to believe him. You know what I'm saying? And so like it's coming back to like, do we trust God? Do we have a relationship with him? Because then we can really believe him. One of the things that like I've really been growing in is this worrying. And worrying is a symptom of unbelief. It really is. Because like I have some things coming up in my life and I'm just like, oh man, I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know what I'm going to do about this. How's that ever going to happen? And I'm pre-stressing about it before it's even here. And it's like before I can even do anything about it. And I'm like constantly thinking of all the ways it's not going to work. And like all that fear and worry is really just faith in the wrong God.
Yeah.
It's having faith that it's going to fail, right? So it's having faith in like what Satan says rather than believing what God says about it. And God is saying, if I've called you to it, I'm going to lead you through it. Right? So like if I trust God and I really believe in his goodness and how much he loves me, I know he's not going to just like be like, oh well, you're on your own. Like little kids, when their parents say, hey, we're going to have pizza tonight, they're not constantly worrying like, oh well, how are they going to pay for it? Like, do they make enough at their jobs to be able to afford this pizza? Like, well, what if the delivery man gets lost? They're just like, woo, we're having pizza, right? They're excited. They believe it. Like they're not like questioning it. They're not constantly worrying about every little thing that can go wrong because they have a relationship with their dad and they know that their dad loves them and they're going to provide. And that's why Jesus was like, become like little children. Does that make sense? So he's not really so much condemning unbelief, which is a symptom of the core issue, which is a lack of knowing him and trusting him and like believing he's good, which again, like doubting he's good. It's like slandering God's character in a way. Does that make sense?
This is a whole controversy.
Yeah, which is literally what the great controversy is all about, like Lucifer saying, hey, God's not good, actually my way's better. Does that make sense? And that was what the whole thing in the Garden of Eden was about. Like, hey, God said don't eat from the fruit, but like, hey, I want to be like God, and my way is better than his. So literally it all, like, unbelief is just a symptom of the core issue. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go into the next blank. And Bonnie, you kind of hinted at this, so you may pick up on it. James 1, 22, 25. Hebrews, James. Okay. All right,
Anybody else got it?
go ahead.
Anybody else got it?
Anyone wanna read? Do you want to read? You haven't read, have you?
That's fine. Go for it.
I have this.
ahead.
Don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it's. But don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you're only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it is like glancing at your face in the mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like.
God.
But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God will bless you for doing it.
So it's be doers of the word, not just hearers.
That's a lot of words for the tiny blank.
No, I'm saying the gist of what he read was
Anybody,
doers, not
anything
just
stand out to anyone else? Okay, so he's saying here, don't merely just listen to it and deceive yourselves, but do what it says. Huh?
Forgetfulness.
No, forgetfulness isn't a sin. Like, I forgot lots of things to do today. Like, I forgot. Like, when you get old, you're sinning a lot. Let's see. I kind of want to talk about this part because, like, this part I feel like was kind of like, but then, like, I thought more about it. The one part where it says, someone who looks at his face in the mirror and then after looking at himself goes away, immediately forgets what he looks like. And, like, I was, like, wondering, like, what that meant and, like, talking with some other people, and it kind of, like, hit me. I was like, you know, we talk about, like, our new identity in Christ, like, as a born-again believer, and how we're not the same person. Like, our old nature is dead, right? And so, like, when you look in the mirror, and then when you go away, you immediately forget, like, what you look like, what your new identity is. You're like, oh, yeah, well, you know, God says, you know, this about me, but then you go off and you're like, you go off and start believing what you were before, like, oh, well, these thoughts and feelings are mine, maybe, you know, like, believing, like, all these things are, you know what I'm saying, like, you're still trapped in sin is inevitable, like, that whole, like, mindset. I wrote in the next part in 25, it says, whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom, and I love that, like, so many people think Christianity is about rules and regulations, and, like, you can't do this, you can't do that, like, you know, it's stealing your fun, or whatever, right, and, like, it's really sad, because, like, Jesus said so many times, like, the gospel is the gospel of freedom. And it says here again, the perfect law that gives freedom. And then there's another verse, I don't remember where it is, I was supposed to look it up, but I forgot. Oh look, sin, forgetting. Where it says, you have been set free for freedom's sake. Like, freedom was the reason. Like, there was no, like, freedom wasn't, like, the byproduct for the reason. Like, to set you free was the reason. Like, why were the Israelites set free from slavery? To be set free. Like, they were set free for freedom's sake, right? Like, God looking at us like, those are my kids. I don't want them to be enslaved to sin and stuck in, like, this bondage where they can't, like, have freedom, because everyone wants their kids to be happy and free. Like, nobody wants their kids to be stuck in bondage, right? Let me don't get off on a tangent here, because I can do that real easy. But the point is here at the beginning, do not merely listen and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. Let's go into the next verse, and we'll see if we can tie it together here. Who wants to get to Colossians 2, 6-15? Philippians, Colossians. I'll read it if no one wants to.
I have it.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
As you therefore have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, as you have been taught, abounding in it with thanksgiving. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ.
Okay, pause. Let's focus on that one verse in 8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. What do we notice about what we kind of just talked about in that verse?
Not being free.
Right, so like, but what's taking you captive?
The what?
What does it say?
I forgot.
Read it!
Philosophy and empty deceit.
Right, so it's like lies, essentially, like a false way of thinking, or like something that's not the truth. And it's like you will be taken captive by these things. Like, and God has given us the truth. He is the way, the truth, and the life to set us free. Like, for freedom's sake, we have been set free. So here, like Paul, did Paul write Colossians? Yeah, he did. I don't know. Paul is setting up here, he's saying like, okay, look, we don't want you to be taken captive by deceptive philosophy and, you know, hollow ideas. And he's saying, okay, so let's tell you what the truth is after we've laid that foundation. Like, don't be deceived by this, so you'll be taken captive. And the next verse tells you, like, okay, what is the truth, like, that we want to stay focused on? And let's pick up back again in verse 9.
For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him, who is the head of all principality and power. In him you were also circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the sins of the flesh, by the circumcision of Christ.
Pause. What do we notice that's really cool about that?
You're
Everything.
complete.
I'm gonna start off a sentence. I
Huh?
was gonna say everything that was bad about you, that was rotten, was cut away.
Right, so like, you know how they had a huge debate about circumcision? Like, oh, should you be circumcised or should you not? Like the Gentiles who haven't been circumcised, should we make them circumcised? Because they were like, oh, is it like basically, is it a sin to not be circumcised? And he's like, you guys missed the whole point. Circumcision in itself, the action in and of itself, like, isn't the thing. Like, it was a metaphor for the thing. Like, when you are circumcised, you're cutting off your flesh, right? And it's going away. It's literally cut off. You're not just managing it. You cut it off and it's gone. So he's saying, like, literally that's what it means to be born again. It's like, in him you were also circumcised with a circumcision not performed by human hands. Your whole self, ruled by the flesh, was put off when you were circumcised with Christ. And so, like, just like the Passover lamb and, you know, and like the unleavened bread, eating it, all that wasn't like doing that wasn't like the thing, and like sacrificing lambs for the forgiveness wasn't the thing. It was a metaphor for the thing. Circumcision was to like teach people and get it into their heads that, like, when you're circumcised, you've cut the flesh off. Like, it's no longer a part of you. It's gone, right? And so, like, they're saying, like, you don't need to do that outwardly. Like, that was just a metaphor for, like, so you can understand what's actually happening inwardly. And so I love how it sets up. Like, he sets it up by saying, like, hey, see to it that no one takes you captive with empty and hollow deceptive philosophy. Because anything that falls short of, like, the transformation is literally just no better than Judaism and Islam, that is just based on just forgiveness and sacrificing of lambs and bulls to appease an angry God. And it doesn't change you. It just leaves you the same.
I like how it says it in the NLT. It says, when you came to Christ, you were circumcised, but not by a physical procedure. Christ performed a spiritual circumcision, the cutting away of your sinful nature.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I love the NLT. It's so poetic. And it's just like, I don't know how I went all my life, like, missing this. Like, you know, like, we do a really good job of preaching forgiveness, but, like, we don't do a really good job of preaching the second half of the gospel, which is the part that actually matters. Like, imagine if, like, I mean, even in the Old Testament, they were hinting towards the transformation. Like, in the, you know, with the Israelites, if they had just ended with, all right, put the lamb's blood over your doors and you'll be spared from death, right? The wages of sin is death, right? So, but the blood of the lamb spared them from the angel coming and wiping out the babies, you know? If they'd be like, oh, cool, you've been forgiven, but, you know, we're going to stay in Egypt. You know, you've been spared, but you should be satisfied with that, but you're still going to be a slave in Egypt. It's like, right? But, like, they were supposed to be set free from the land of their bondage and brought out of it into the promised land, right? Into their salvation, right? And so, like, even in the Old Testament, we see, like, forgiveness is not all the only bit. Like, I think that's amazing, like, how I never, like, saw that, and, like, how seeing that, like, is really, like, changes your life. So, kind of got off topic from what I was supposed to talk about with my blank. I'm sorry. This is, like, one of my favorite topics to talk about. What was I going to say? Okay, so it said it more in the James one about deceiving yourself. And Bonnie had mentioned this before. So the blank is willful deception. So there's a difference between not knowing something because you didn't know, and there's a difference between, like, willfully being, like, deceiving yourself, where you know the truth, but you're, like, you know those people that are, like, pathological liars and they, like, don't even remember, like, what's true anymore because they just lie so much and they just convince themselves, like, that what they're doing is fine. I forget what you said, Bonnie. It was a really good point.
Choosing to be blind.
Huh?
Choosing to be blind.
Yeah, choosing to be blind. So like you see it right in front of you and you're just like, you know what, no, I'm not gonna believe that. And that's that's a whole nother level of like unbelief, if you ask me, like being willfully deceived. Cause you know what you've been taught like the truth and you're like, you know what? Anyways, kind of went off on a long tangent on that one, but that's okay. All right, the last side, the last bit.
Do you want to read the rest of the verses?
Was there more?
Yeah, 12 through 15. Unless you want to skip that.
Which 12 through 15?
In Colossians.
the last mindset on the sin
Oh. I mean, it's okay. It's not relevant to that. You can read it later if you want to. All right, last side. We're in the brain still. Now, what is not sin? Let me just hold this up real quick because I feel like I've been talking for a while. Okay, so on the last part, not sin in the brain. Let's look at 1 Timothy 1:13. I never know where 1 Timothy is. Yeah.
It's right before 2 Timothy.
Huh? What'd you say?
It's right before 2 Timothy.
1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 3rd, no, Hebrews, James.
Keep going past
No.
Colossians. You go through the
Colossians.
Thessalonians,
Oh, it's after
and
Thessalonians.
Thessalonians.
Right,
Yeah.
because the T's are together, that's right. Okay, 1 Timothy 1:13. Whoops. Who's reading it?
Even though I used to blaspheme the name of Christ in my insolence, I persecuted his people. But God had mercy on me because I did it in ignorance and unbelief.
Okay. I like this, because Timothy is saying like, hey, I used to do all this stuff.
Paul said something.
Paul is saying I used to do all this stuff. Thank you. Paul is saying that he used to be a blasphemer, a persecutor, a violent man. He was shown mercy because he acted in ignorance and unbelief. So like what he, when he was persecuting Christians, like he thought what he was doing was right. Like he was always a very zealous man, very passionate. Like his motives were right, but he was wrong. If that makes sense. He was wanting to like further God's cause and by wiping out this heretical philosophy that he thought the Christians were preaching, right? But he's saying like, I was shown mercy because he acted in ignorance. So he didn't know any better until like he was shown that what the right way was. Now, if Jesus had revealed himself to him and he'd be like, oh wow, I realized I was wrong, and then he continued doing the same thing, that's different. Like that's where you get into like being willfully deceiving yourself.
I not believe that.
Right. So like when you don't know, like there's lots of like right now like you'd be surprised a lot of people don't know. Like as a believer and as a Christian, I know that like having sex outside of marriage is wrong, right? But like your average person on the street, like they were never raised to believe that. Like they don't even know that's a thing that's like it's just kind of accepted. Like like little kids that are raised in this society, like they're not gonna know like that's something. Because like even in like 50 years ago, like even if you weren't a Christian, like people didn't do that. People didn't like have sex outside of marriage because it was like society even frowned upon that, like worldly society. Like you know what I'm talking? Like even in like TV shows, they wouldn't show like a man and a wife like in bed together because that was like too much. Now we practically have like porn like playing through like Game of Thrones, and it's like perfectly fine. You see what I'm saying? So like people who are unbelievers, they might have like no idea that something is wrong, and then like they realize, oh, this is wrong, and now like they know better. Like little kids who do things that they didn't know was wrong. Like how little kids say the F word, but they don't have any idea what they're saying. They just heard it somewhere and they're saying it. But like you can't be mad at little kids for like saying something they don't know until you tell them, hey, you can't say that because it's wrong. And if they choose after that point to continue doing it, then it's wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We'll see that here in a few verses in a second
So
here.
if Paul had like died before Jesus had come to him, he would have been saved.
There's a verse that says when you sin apart from the law, you die apart from the law. So it's like if you don't know any better, you're not held accountable for what you don't know to be wrong.
Yeah.
So like
he would have been in heaven.
I'm not God, so I don't know. All I know is that what his motives were, were pure, which is why I think God could use him. He knew, like, hey, Paul is really zealous and he's trying to, like, he thinks he's going about the right way, but, you know, I'm going to show him the right way. So, like, I think he was looking at Paul saying, you know, this is a passionate man who, like, has pure motives, but he has no idea that he's completely going down the wrong direction. And I think that's why he was able to use Paul, because his motives were pure. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the only person that knows the motives of the heart is God.
Yeah, and yourself. I mean, you don't always know all of your motives and intentions, because sometimes we deceive even ourselves, like, oh yeah, I'm doing this for the right reason, but really we're not. But, like, yeah, I'm glad that I'm not God,
Because to me,
because I don't want to have to judge everyone.
that looks terrible. Like, he went around killing people.
Yeah.
Like, to me, I would have wanted nothing with him. That's why the
Well, he
prophet was afraid to go. He's like, why are you sending
Yeah.
me to my death?
But all the religious leaders were, like, applauding him, you know, so, like, so, like, some people thought he was doing the right thing too.
They were.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, they were all. Anyways, let's go to the next verse. John 10:16. John. I know where that is. John 10:16. Anyone?
I mean, I haven't.
Go ahead. Read aloud. Say it louder for them in the back. Sorry.
And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd.
So this wasn't exactly the verse I was referencing, but it's kind of pointing to the fact that, like, you know, Jesus, people always ask, like, what about people who died that never heard of Jesus? You know, and it's like, well, if you can't be held accountable for what you've never heard or don't know. So what you are held accountable for is your motives and, like, what you do know, right? So, like, he's saying, like, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. And he's talking to Jews. So he's like, you know, basically he's saying, like, the Jews aren't the only ones that are going to be saved, right? So it's like the mindset of, like, well, are Christians the only ones saved? Because, like, what about these tribes in Africa that have never heard the gospel? You know what I'm saying? So Jesus is saying, like, look, like, it's not just the Jews that have the truth or know the truth that are going to be saved, but, you know, I can judge people's intentions and motivations based off what they do know. So, like, if in their tribe they know it's wrong to murder, but they do it anyway, that shows where they're at, versus, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and then these last two are in Romans. Romans 2, so we'll just stay in Romans the rest of the time. Romans 2:14 to 15.
Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts. Their consciences also bear witness, and their thoughts, sometimes accusing them, and other times defending them.
I literally couldn't have said it better myself. So, like, when people ask, like, well, what if you don't know? You know, I'm like, well, you know, Jesus has understanding. He's not going to be like, oh, well, you did this and you didn't know better. Like, he's saying, like, people who don't have the law, like, they have a conscience. They have, you know, motives. If they do by nature what's required of the law, they are a law for themselves. So I think that's pretty awesome. And let's read the last one here. Romans 7, verses 7 and 8. Can't talk. I'll read it, I guess. Romans 7, verse 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sinful? Certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would not have known what coveting really was if the law had said, you shall not covet. I think that was kind of what I was getting at. Like, there's some things that we don't know are wrong until we're told that they're wrong. And that's what part of, like, growing up is, like, children becoming adults, like, they don't know it's wrong to not say the F word until their mom says, hey, that's a bad word, let's not say that. You know, and, like, non-believers, you know, they've never been raised to believe that purity is a good and precious thing. Like, they believe having, you know, sleeping with their boyfriend is completely normal and, like, it's not a problem. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because they've never been taught, like, that's a thing that matters. So we're not held accountable for what we don't know. And so the blank, who wants to take a stab at what they think the blank is?
Stabbing is sinful.
Stabbing is thank you. Yeah.
It depends on your intent.
Yes. Yeah, Stephen got it. It's ignorance. Yeah.
I just want to point out though that even if ignorance in and of itself is not sin, like purposely staying in ignorance probably is.
Well, that's why I put willful deceit on that other side. So that's why it's important to differentiate between I didn't know versus like,
I
well,
don't
you
wanna
knew,
know.
I don't want to know. Exactly. Choosing to be blind, purposely being blind. I want to show this video that I thought was really cool. I don't know if Michelle, you'll be able to see it because you're on a thingy. But,
Just tilt her back and she'll be fine.
So there's a-
oh, does someone want to take the computer and aim it towards her?
Just tilt her back, she'll be fine.
No, don't power off, power on. Dang it.
Oh man.
Ah, I'm a failure.
It must have been sleeping.
It was. So what I'm about to show you is, have you guys ever heard of Bethel Church?
What?
Angle it up.
With your upside down face? That's scary.
Angle it more that, angle it. Yeah. Okay. This, oh, you guys don't know Michelle. Michelle, I've known since I was like, what, 13? Something ridiculous.
I don't know, is it 13 or something ridiculous?
It was ridiculous that you were 13.
And like, she's one of my spiritual moms. Like,
Aw.
that's been there for me.
Through thick and thin.
Like literally when I was being crazy and living a terrible life. And now look where I am.
Still crazy, but living a
Still
just
crazy.
life. Living a just
Still
life.
crazy, but living my best life.
TV on the Sabbath.
Shut up.
Okay, so,
Oh
oh no, I don't want that. Dang it.
Sin in your skin.
That's not what I wanted.
no! What am I watching on the
Sin.
Sabbath?
I'm gonna have your prayer juice.
Okay, so what I'm looking up is called Sin is Not a Mistake. I think that's what it called. Shoot. We'll find out here in a second.
Sin
It's
is
by,
no match for grace.
that sounds like a good sermon too. This is only a 5-minute clip, so don't freak out.
Good.
It's, have you guys heard of Bethel Church?
Of course.
Yeah,
Can you pour me a cup?
I visited there in December,
But I won't.
and I got to go to their church.
You don't have to.
No,
And-
you're ignorant.
The pastor, one of the pastors there, his name is Chris Valentin, and he's talking about this topic of like what sin is, and I just thought it was really good. Let's see if I can. This takes a really long time to individually do each one of these letters.
Because you're not fast. You need like a
Okay.
person
Whew.
that plays.
All right, I have it. Is everyone ready?
There
No.
needs to be like keyboard remotes.
Huh? I know it's really annoying.
It's funny
Come,
to me,
come,
like, why
come.
is this a thing now? Yeah.
All right.
About here. Thanks. Wow.
Well, Steven's serving everyone. How selfless of you. I love the motive of
No,
your
my,
heart.
My motive is just to show off.
Oh.
Just go on.
Drop in and just
What is
work.
it?
Pear juice.
Is it
No.
Okay, anybody else want some?
Sure.
Alright.
All right.
Please and thank you.
I didn't say this earlier. Can someone remind me to say something later? Bonnie, remind me to say something
Say something.
after this video.
About.
I'll remember.
Something I remember to remind you.
One thing I heard in church last time I went was really good. They were talking about like how you're not supposed to do your good works in front of other people for attention, but then like in another verse it says, "Let your light so shine before men, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So it's like, am I supposed to do my good deeds in front of people or not? And it's like, again, it's not the action of doing your good deeds.
It's contact.
It's that matters. It's like, why are you doing it? And it's important. Like one thing he said that really helped me, he said like, if you're tempted to show off your good deed, then you should hide it. If you're tempted to hide, then you should probably show it. Because like if I'm like embarrassed about like the fact that, oh, I don't sleep around and everyone else saying that they are, you know, it's out of like embarrassment and like being ashamed that I'm not wanting to speak up. So in that sense, like I should speak up and let my light so shine before men, right? So he's saying like, what is your motivation? Like, are you wanting to show your good deed because you're trying to like show off? Then you should probably hide it and do it in secret. or are you like not showing it because you're afraid and feeling embarrassed and condemned, then you probably should stand up and show it. And I thought that really helped me because I was like, okay, well, which is it? Am I supposed to like do my good deeds in front of people or not? You know? And so like I really like that. If you're tempted to show, hide. If you're tempted to hide, then show. Boom. Easy to remember. Okay, we're ready. Yeah, Chris Valentin, one of the pastors from Bethel Church, visited there, met him, super cool. Go. If it'll load, that'd be great.
How many of you know that you can't sin by mistake? There's a difference between a mistake and a sin. The only way you can sin is to know that what you're doing is wrong and do it anyway. I had a young man stand up and challenge me at YWAM. He said, "Can I ask you a question?" He was kind of passionate. I said, "Yeah." He's getting really frustrated with me. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you go a whole day without sinning?" I said, "Uh-huh." He sits down. I'm like, "Well, that was simple." I thought he was going to like take her on to the... I said, I've gone a whole week without sinning. Now he looks like he's in shock. And so I started to say, well, wait a second, let's define what sin is. Sin means that you knew something was wrong and you did it anyway. You cannot sin by mistake. Now it says that when the law came, sin increased. Why did it increase when the law came? Because listen, how did you judge whether or not you were sinning before the law? How many of you know that Abraham lived before the law of Moses? Am I losing you? Is this boring? Okay, Abraham lived before the law of Moses. But was there still sin in the days before the law? Yes, there was. But how many of you know that? How did God determine whether or not you sinned? Because there is a conscience that every person has. Everyone is born in the deepest parts of Africa. They've never heard of Jesus. How are they going to be judged? By what they thought was right and wrong. It said, Jesus said it this way, he says, "By your words will you be judged, and by your words will you be condemned." In other words, if you said, "Hey, that's wrong," let's say you say your neighbor does something, you go, "That's wrong." God takes that note. Okay, take note. Chris said this is wrong. And then when you break that rule that you made for yourself, God goes, "Wait a second, you said that was wrong, you broke your own law." So what were you judged? Before there was a law, what were you judged by? Your own conscience. You said that was wrong, but you did it anyway. Are you following me? But what happened when the law came? When the law came, you went from having these many rules. God goes, because man said, "Listen, we don't want a relationship with God. We want rules. We'll get to heaven by keeping the rules." God goes, "You want to keep the rules? Okay, here's the rules." And what happened? Suddenly, I became aware that a whole bunch of my behavior that I've already been doing, are you with me, is now wrong. Now, guess what? From that point on, if I continue in the behavior, now I know right from wrong. If I do it, now it's sin. Okay, well, some of you got that same look that young man had.
Remember how we were talking about like once you know better, now you know better? You know, like if you didn't know it was wrong, you're not held accountable for that. Yeah, that's a good point. Anyways.
Sin is a heart issue. So a mistake and a sin aren't the same thing. I can, I've used this example many times. I can back my car up and run over somebody and kill them by accident. How many of you know that's sad? It happens all the time. Accidents, they're called accidents for a reason.
How do I help you?
You're pooped out.
We have a calamity.
Man down.
We're having technical difficulties. Please hold.
Oh,
That's
no,
like
it's okay. I didn't get.
I'm sorry. I'll be good.
You have to put the middle of it in the center.
I wasn't hurt. I just flopped like backwards.
There you go, now it's centered.
I like saw it happen, but I couldn't even like get the words out inside.
I didn't see any.
If you back it further, not against the wall, then you can put it more in the center, and then it won't bang against the wall, and it won't be uneven. So like pull it back the way.
Here, I'll just sit
You can sit in it. It's just yeah.
I was trying to go where how I was before, but
You just sit like.
Okay.
Just sit. It's okay, just sit.
Gravity conspired against you.
Yes.
We're in. Alright. Handle with care. Let's rewind just a tad bit. Okay.
Okay, some of you got that same look that young man had. Sin is a heart issue. So a mistake and a sin aren't the same thing. I can, I've used this example many times. I can back my car up and run over somebody and kill them by accident. How many of you know that's sad? It happens all the time. Accidents on the road. They're called accidents for a reason. It's called an accident. I didn't do it on purpose. How many of you know that there's a mess to clean up there? There's grief. There's all that stuff that happens with a mistake. But how many know I won't have to answer to God for it? I didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't a hard issue. How many know that I can see somebody on the sidewalk I'm mad at, drive my car up on the sidewalk, run over their foot? I didn't kill them. All I did was break their foot. But how many know I'm going to answer for that from God? Why? I did it on purpose. It's not the depth of the damage that determines whether I sinned or not. Okay, well. So when somebody says, have you sinned? Can you go a whole day with sinning? Well, yeah, I've slept in. No, but on a serious note, what some people are saying is, can you go a week without making a mistake? Me? No. No, my whole staff is up in the front like, amen, no, he can't. But there's a difference between, hey, I hurt your feelings, I said something I wish I wouldn't have said, I didn't realize, and you know what, watch this, I'm mad at you, I'm going to hurt you. How many of you know?
Wow, this literally talks about what we just talked about in the beginning. Like, accidentally hurting someone's feelings and, like, purposely, like, trying to say something to hurt their feelings. God's cool. Okay, cool.
So that one I'll answer for God for, but I have a mess to clean up with both of them. Just one isn't with God. If that makes sense. Okay.
Anyways, yeah, it's a 5-minute clip of a regular whole sermon because we don't have time to sit here.
You take a seed and you.
Sorry.
It's a sign.
Yeah, so he's got some really good stuff. I just found that clip, wanted to share it. I wanted to end on 2 things. So since we're talking about sin being primarily a heart issue and a brain issue, I want to talk just really quick about, do you guys remember like last time we talked about the different types of people? We've got non-believer Nancy, cheap grace Chad, half gospel Harry, transformed Tyler, and like how their lives look different. Now, I just want to ask you guys, like the cheap grace mentality, where people say like, oh, sin really isn't that big of a deal. God loves me, he'll forgive me. Basically, they're looking for a way to sin and get away with it. Where do you think the issue's coming from? The heart or the brain?
Both.
Well, primarily, where is
brain, because the brain is trying to justify.
Well, if someone's looking for a way to sin and get away with it and they really don't think sin's a big of a deal, what's wrong? Are you saying something, Michelle?
It's a heart issue.
Yeah, it's a heart issue. Because their motives are completely wrong. They have no desire to do the right thing, right? So that's why it's important to like analyze your motives, because you can fall into the cheap grace mentality. People are like, oh, sin's not that big of a deal. God will forgive me. I really have no intent of like actually doing the right thing,
That could be ignorance too.
Well, there's always going to be a mixture, but like the core is like something wrong with the heart. Because if you remember, we looked at the lifestyle of someone with a cheap grace mentality and someone with a non-believer mentality. They pretty much have this exact same life. Like a non-believer, when they hit temptation, they're like, yeah, I want to do that. So they do it, right? And then they stay there because they like doing it. If it feels good, do it. A cheap grace mentality person, they run into temptation, they do it, and they're like, oh, well, I don't actually have to change because I can just keep living this way and God loves me and there's grace. Right, so the life of a non-believer looks exactly the same as a person with like a cheap grace mentality, and it's all heart issue. And the difference between a non-believer and a believer is like, have you died to the flesh? Like, and if you haven't, like, that's the heart issue, right? And so, like, now let's look at the brain. Someone who only understands like half the gospel or is legalistic, they're like saying, oh, you know, they're having a preoccupation with behavior and like willpower and outward expressions of like, you know, trying to produce good things. And like their attitude towards sin is that, well, sin's inevitable, you know, so we just do the best we can to like make ourselves better. Where is the primary issue coming from? Where? From the mind, because they're trying to do good, right? They want to, but they believe that like, you know, sin is inevitable. It's just something I have to really strive to overcome. So they're lacking the knowledge of the truth, which we talked about in Colossians, where he said like, don't be led astray by this philosophy. And then he proceeds to say like, this is the truth. You have been, your spirit has been circumcised. Right? So these people, they don't have the heart issue because they're trying to do the right thing, right? They're not acting out of rebellion, right? They're doing it, but they have a messed up thinking that they have to like sanctify themselves or that they're saved by their work. So that comes from a faulty thinking of the brain, right? And so like I show this to show that like you have to have both. You have to have your heart and your brain. A lot of, you know, an argument against Christianity is like, oh, well, you guys just have faith and it's not rooted in anything. Like, Jesus says, come, let's reason together, right? Like, he doesn't want you to just blindly just be like, oh, well, let's just be sheep and follow this. Like, he wants you to use your heart and your mind, right? And, like, if we have, you know, incorrect motives in our heart, like, we're really, like, no better than a non-believer. And if we think, and if we're thinking, if we don't have the truth, we may have good intentions, but we'll never be free because we don't believe freedom is possible, right? Like, you can never step out of Egypt and go to the promised land if you don't believe that there is one or that you ever are supposed to leave Egypt, right? So like both of these are super important. And like I lived in like the land of like legalism like my entire life, like striving to constantly like get better and wondering why am I still facing temptation? Why am I still falling? Because I didn't have the revelation of the truth that like now I'm trying to like share with you guys. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so like that's why I'm like so trying to like drive this home, because like it matters so much. Like there's a difference between fighting for victory in something and fighting from victory. Like Christ already has the victory in that area, right? He's already won, like he's already beat death and like set us free from that. It's like fighting from victory is a completely different like battle than fighting for it. And the last thing I wanted to share is this one verse that I found that basically like is where I got the inspiration for this whole like heart mind thing. And I'm just going to read it real quick if I can find it. It's Philippians 2, verse 13. I didn't write it down in your papers because I ran out of time and I ran out of ink. Philippians 2:13, which says, "For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose." And like I read that and like it kind of just all clicked. Like, it is God who works in you to will, so to want to, right? Where does that come from? No, like, where that comes from the heart, right? Like, it is God who works in you to will and to want to do something and to act. So it's not just wanting to, but it's like believing that you can, right? So it's like God works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. And so like that literally like encompasses like this whole thing here. Like if you just want to, but you don't feel like you can, or you don't have the ability to, you're not going to. Like you can want to be an astronaut, you know, as much as you want to, but if you don't have like the training or the ability to be one, you're never going to go to the moon. Like, you know what I mean? And so like he's saying like, I've given you the transformation, I've given you the ability to be transformed. So like not only do you have the desire to be, but I'm giving you the ability to do so. So like he gives us like a heart and a brain that's able to do it. And like I read that verse and I was just like, wow, like he literally like has given us every reason to be successful. Yeah. And I just think that's really awesome. And that's really all I have. I don't know if you guys have any last thoughts about anything. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yeah. Anything? No?
I think we like pretty much covered it in the discussion.
Yeah, I was actually really like impressed that you guys pretty much like brought up every point that I actually went over, like in the beginning when I asked like what is sin. You guys already like touched on everything that I brought up. So I think that's really cool. How do you guys feel now? Sorry, I asked a feeling question looking at a man.
What's that? I feel attacked.
Michelle, do you have any thoughts over there? I don't feel like I really gave you a chance to like say anything.
Well, I look at a woman and ask for thoughts, and then you look at her. I'm just kidding.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I think you hit on all the points. I think it was really good. I think it's important for us to know, learn our heart issues and go to God with like, Lord, teach me to, show me my heart and where I'm faulting and where I need growth and correct that in me,
Yeah. I think this is especially important for Seventh-day Adventists because I feel like as a whole, I mean, obviously there's exceptions for each person, but like as a whole, as a church culture, I feel like we tend to fall into the legalistic side of things. I mean, would you guys agree? Like the kind of, yes. Yeah, and so, we're constantly like worried about like, oh, am I sinning? Like, is this wrong or is this the right thing to do? Like, especially when you think about taking Sabbath. Like, we talked about Christian dilemmas last week and like how to decide like what the right thing to do is in a situation, right? And like one of the things that we got down to is like, we're so worried about like, oh, should I pick this decision or should I pick this decision? Like, I don't know, I don't want to sin. And it's like, if you're not wanting to sin and you're like wanting to do the right thing, like you shouldn't have to constantly be worrying that you're sinning because you're not rebelling, you're not acting out of selfishness, right? It's like God has set us free from like that fear of like condemnation, like if you're deciding between like, oh man, like should I do this, should I do that, like is it wrong for me to eat out on Sabbath or not, like I don't know, is it okay for me to ride my bike out on Sabbath, is it okay to like go out with my friends, like constantly worrying like is this a sin or is this not a sin, is it a sin, like again, like we've been set free from like all the burdens of the law, right? And it's really hard, I feel like, for Seventh-day Adventists to like, to take in and like envelop and embrace, but there's just so much more freedom, like in the gospel, knowing that like if your heart has been made pure, like you're not gonna want to sin, and so like God will lead you and like reveal to you like what the correct way is, and we don't have to constantly be afraid of sinning. Does that make sense? Like we shouldn't be afraid of sinning when that's not what we're like seeking after. Like God will direct you, like he'll speak to you, like his spirit lives in you. And when you're born again, like his spirit like literally like takes dwelling place inside your heart. We are the new temple. The temple was destroyed, the veil was torn, there's no longer any separation. So I think that's really just like an encouragement, like that we don't need to be constantly freaking out about like worrying every second, like, oh, am I sinning now? Did I sin today? Did I pray for all of my sins to be forgiven? Like, how we tend to pray like, God, please forgive all the sins I may not be thinking of. You know what I mean? Like that prayer, it's like, why are we doing that? Like, did the Holy Spirit convict you that you did something wrong? If he didn't, like, why are we like constantly in a sin conscious mindset, like where that's become like the forefront of our focus? Does that make sense? Like we're still like acting as if we're living in Egypt and in sin when we've been taken out of it. If the
fear and anxiety.
Right, and that comes from unbelief, right? And what he accomplished and finished on the cross. So like this is like learning that like that I don't have to be constantly afraid of like am I doing the right thing right now? Or did I sin like 5 seconds ago? Like, oh my gosh, like what if there's a sin that I forgot to ask for forgiveness for? Like, like if the Holy Spirit hasn't convicted you that it was wrong, like we don't need to be constantly like worrying and scanning our you know what I mean? There's a lot more freedom than I feel like we allow ourselves, and why so many like SDAs get like caught in like this legalism trap and like the shame cycle, and then they get pulled further and further away. Anyways, I don't need to go on another rant. That's all I have. Yeah.
Like what we were talking about, the renewing of your mind, and that's why it's so powerful that we need to be in His Word every day, because when we know the truth, then that transforms what we believe, which then takes away the shame and condemnation, because we're in His Word and we're around the truth, and we that belief gets stronger every day. And we have to renew our mind every day, because
Well, and the devil has been lying for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, he's pretty good at it. So,
Oh, yeah.
it's really easy to fall for that.
Absolutely.
Anyways, yeah, good talk. We can, let's just pray it out so we can, like, kind of end. You guys don't have to leave. You can stay and talk and chat and hang out as usual. But that way we can kind of, like, close it, and you can feel free to stay. Or if people need to go, they can go. Does anybody want to pray? I'm not looking at you, sorry. I'm looking at you, but I'm not like, Bonnie, do you want to pray? I will if nobody wants to.
Nubia, come on. Fall asleep.
She's pretending to be asleep.
Tisk tisk.
I'll pray if it... All right, let's close our eyes, or if you don't have to, actually, there's nothing sinful about not closing your eyes. If you want to keep your eyes open, go for it. Okay. Dear Father, thank you so much. Just for that everybody is here right now. We get to just talk about you and like think about stuff deeply that we probably don't have a chance to do very much else during the week or in our regular lives. I pray that like these people here like are interested in talking about it and want to know you more. Thank you for the work that you've done in each one of our hearts, that you have made us good, that you have made us new, that you have set us free from worry and anxiety, that freedom is possible, which is something I never really even knew was possible, and it's completely changed my life. I pray that God, that you will continue to water the seed of revelation in each and every one of us here, that we can meditate on it, and it takes time. I remember when I first heard it, it took me a while to really digest it and get it. But God, I just want to thank you so much for enabling us to have the desire and the ability to carry out your word. You've given us a new heart and a new mind. So again, thank you so much just for everything, for being here with us, and for just loving us so much, and just your goodness. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye, Michelle. I guess you can go. I don't know if you want to. You don't have to stay.
Stay and hang out.
Stay and hang out.